Welcome everyone to the Climate Commission's International Forum here at the Sydney Town Hall. Before we start, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I would like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and elders from other communities who may be here today. Now, the aim of the event today, as I say, is to discuss the critical choice we face on action for climate change. And we have, as I said, a fascinating group of international speakers with us to give us a briefing on what is happening around the world to limit carbon emissions. This is important because, as some of you may know, one of the Climate Commission's roles, along with discussing with Australians the science of climate change and explaining how a carbon tax will work, is to report back to Australians on international action to tackle climate change. So we're very pleased to have with us our international experts, and let me introduce them in order. On my far left we have Lisa Adams, former Secretary of the California Environmental Protection Agency from the United States. Beside her, Professor Minik Rosing from the Natural History Museum of Denmark. Beside him we have, let me get my names in order, Dr. Parikh. Dr. Parikh wears a couple of hats. He is chair of an expert group which is preparing a low-carbon strategy for inclusive growth for the National Planning Commission of India. And he's also part of a non-profit think tank in India called the Integrated Research and Action for Development. Beside him is Dr. Jiang. Dr. Jiang is the Director of the Energy Research Institute at the National Development and Reform Commission in China. Representing the World Bank, we have Dan Cameron, Chief Technical Specialist for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, again from the World Bank. And we also have some commissioners from the Climate Commission. We're pleased to have with us the Chief Commissioner, Tim Flannery, who you'll all recognise. Roger Beale is with us. Roger is close beside Tim. He's an economist and public policy expert and currently Executive Director of the Economics and Policy at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And Professor Leslie Hughes is not on the stage, she's in the audience, and we welcome her as well. I'm going to put my glasses on, I got them a week ago, and I'm going to have to accept that I'm getting long in the tooth and wide in the girth, and this is the first sign. So my role here, I guess, is to learn from you all and from these international experts, just as you are. I am fascinated to piggyback off your sense of inquiry that you bring to all of this. So as I am gaining as much as I am giving, I thought it was appropriate for me to donate my fee today to a charity called the Australian Indigenous Education Fund, which pays the school fees for young Indigenous Australians to attend some of the best boarding schools in the country to help break the cycle of disadvantage in their remote communities. Look, it's a program that's working. I commend it to you. BHP's just kicked in $4 million and it's really making a difference in those communities. As I said, you will have time to ask questions today, but it is also an information session. So there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end after the international panellists and our commissioners speak. I'd invite you to think hard about your questions, keep them short, and please questions, not statements, and we'll all learn more. So it should be an informative afternoon full of fascinating speakers on one of the most pressing issues of our time, and thank you all so very much for making time in your busy days to come along today. It's now my great pleasure to introduce to you all the Lord Mayor of Sydney to say a few words. Please welcome Clover Moore.
Thank you, Ellen, and hello everyone. A very warm welcome to the Lower Town Hall this afternoon and a very warm welcome to our international visitors. It's a great honour to welcome the Australia's Chief Climate Commissioner, Professor Tim Flannery, who has spoken at our city events before. One of our heroes, I have to say, and the Commission's international guest to the city. So a very warm welcome. And I'm very pleased that this Climate Commission event is being held here. This is an important public event to report on the progress of international action in dealing with climate change. This has been a critical element missing in the current debate. Despite the reports to the contrary, Australia is not the first country to propose a price on carbon, nor is it the first to propose an emissions trading scheme. In fact, New South Wales introduced the world's first emissions trading scheme in 2003, which is probably something you don't know, when it launched the mandatory New South Wales greenhouse gas abatement scheme, and the European Union has had a scheme in place since 2005. Likewise, it's not only developed countries taking action. Two of the world's largest greenhouse gas emitters, China and India, have both recently announced measures to reduce their carbon emissions, and I'm sure you are looking forward to hearing about those measures from Dr. Zhang from China's Energy Research Institute at the National Development and Reform Commission, and Dr. Kirit Parikh, Chair of the Indian think tank, the Integrated Research and Action for Development, about what their governments are doing. I actually have to leave a little bit earlier because I have to go and speak in Parliament, but I know you will be very interested to hear what they have to say about our neighbours and the action that our neighbours are taking. Governments around the globe are recognising, and I repeat that, governments around the globe are recognising this is our biggest challenge, and they're recognising that a low-carbon economy doesn't mean an end to growth, but rather a much-needed impetus to shift from polluting practices to greener technologies. Indeed, recently, Frontier Economics reported that under a carbon price, there would be 6,400 more jobs in Sydney in 2020 compared to the business-as-usual scenario. So I'll just repeat that, 6,400 more jobs in Sydney in 2020 compared to the business-as-usual scenario. So I want to say that I am very proud that the city I lead is committed to addressing climate change. It is our biggest issue and it drives everything we do. We have taken a very strong position on advocacy and action, and it's an approach we call show by doing. When our national government lost its nerve after Copenhagen, we recommitted to innovative low-carbon solutions, to share our research and to build partnerships for action. We were the first Australian local government to become carbon neutral in 2007 by buying green power and carbon offsets. We did this because we know that cities are responsible for up to 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and so it's in our cities where the greatest opportunities for deep cuts in emissions lie. We've developed a long-term plan by talking to residents, businesses and visitors, and we have done thorough research. And 3 years on, we're well on track to meeting our targets. Our plan, Sustainable Sydney 2030, outlines our key target to have zero reliance on coal-fired electricity and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the City of Sydney, Australia's global city, in our city by 70% based on our 2006 levels, and we're going to do that by 2030. Our most ambitious program will transform energy supply throughout the city, completely replacing our dependence on coal with energy from local trigeneration and renewable resources by 2030. This is really important because Australia, and this is shocking really, it's the highest emitter of greenhouse gases per capita in the developed world, mainly due to our centralised coal-fired power stations. Some of the major milestones that we've achieved over the past 12 months include we've set aside $180 million to help transform central Sydney with light rail, the city's biggest single investment since the 2000 Olympics. We're working towards finalising Australia's first decentralised energy master plan, which will supply the city with 100% local, low-carbon energy in 20 years, the most ambitious government target in the country. We have established the Better Buildings Partnership. That's an Australian first alliance, and it's between the City of Sydney and the 13 major landlords who own 60% of the city's office space and more than $100 billion worth of property assets. They've committed to meeting the targets that the city has set to cut their carbon emissions, to save energy, water and waste. We've completed the first stage of our 200-kilometre bike network, an alternative form of transport, and bike trips have already doubled and tripled on those routes. And this is one of the things I really like, we've planted 2,000 new trees over the last year, and there'll be another 40,000 street trees and park trees planted to double our street canopy over the next 20 years, improving air quality and, of course, providing more places for our birds and animals, cooling air and cutting power bills. We know that we are in the critical decade and that decisions we make now and from now on up till 2020 will determine the severity of climate change. And we're aware of what's been happening in Australia. And we're aware of what our children and grandchildren will experience if we don't take action in this critical decade. Our federal government now has a plan, and though the debate remains fierce, which is really disappointing, we are strong supporters of a price on carbon here at the City. We've had a resolution at Council. We see that as a mechanism for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and averting the worst impacts of global warming. And I want to just say in conclusion that it's clear that in the present climate, action is the most effective way to advocate urgently needed change in our cities. And of course, we're the most urbanised country in the world. The majority of Australians live in our cities, and so it's here in our cities that we can take this action. So I'm sure you would agree with me that we welcome the opportunity to find out more about the action of other nations to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So a very warm welcome to our guests, and when I slip away, it's because I've got to go to Parliament. So thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, for hosting us today and for your leadership in this issue. We just had a briefing earlier this morning about what the city's doing, and I think all of our international visitors were very impressed, so thank you. And can I thank you all for being here today? This is really your day. Our role as Climate Commissioners is to engage the Australian public in discussion about all aspects of climate change, the science, the economics, and what's happening internationally. And we've found over the last 6 or 7 months that one of the areas where there is the greatest public confusion is the extent of action overseas, what different countries are doing, what their targets are, and what's actually happening on the ground. And it was to address that we brought together this international group of visitors to Australia, just to make sure that the message was getting out very clearly. We don't expect you to believe necessarily what we say, but we do expect you to take seriously what the people who are doing the actions actually tell you. I think we're in for a treat today. We have here representatives of about 1/3 of the world's population and some of its most powerful institutions. I have been astonished at what I've heard from them, and I'm sure you will be too. And really, we will try to get through this fairly promptly, where we speak, and then turn over to you for questions, because it is your event and we would love to hear any questions that you have, and hope that you will ask them in a respectful manner, given that we're hosting a number of very important international delegates. Thank you very much. With that, I shall hand over to our first speaker, who is Dan Kammen from the World Bank. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank you all for the chance to have what I hope will be a really exciting dialogue during this meeting, and with some of you afterwards as well. And I'm from a very advantaged position in thinking about what low-carbon economies can do. I was formerly a professor in the Energy and Resources program at the University of California, Berkeley, where I worked with Linda Adams, our former Secretary of the EPA, and many others on our, at least for us, landmark climate legislation, for innovative policies to build the amount of renewable energy in our mix, to get a lower carbon mix of fuel in our vehicles, to challenge ourselves to keep electricity use per person level over 30 years while it's grown globally. So California is 40% more efficient than the national average. That gave me a neat background to go to the World Bank, where I am running and managing projects on renewable energy and energy efficiency, those thought of together. The World Bank has a portfolio of about $8 billion a year in energy, and about 5 of that is in energy efficiency and renewables. And when I go to our client countries and the donor countries to the bank, there's a remarkable message, and that really is innovation is happening, job creation is happening in the countries, the cities, the communities that are thinking most about how to tie these things together, which is why it's so nice to be in Sydney, one of the climate-leading C40 cities, and in Australia, which is really debating how to put this into practice. And as a physicist, what I most see is how inefficient we use energy almost everywhere in the world. There's a little footnote about some of the poorest communities are the most efficient because energy is the most expensive, the most dear in those places. But for many of us, that's not how we treat our energy resources, because they've been undervalued for their social impact for a very long time. And so of the World Bank's clients, some 90 countries have put together climate plans that are as single issue as just finding a way to have a quota for renewable energy, to finding a way to use urban waste as a fuel supply, to those that are comprehensive, that look at the electricity mix, bringing down the amount of carbon in fuels. And what we're finding again and again in small rural communities in East Africa or in Nicaragua, to large nations, both currently rich and poor, is that the more energy efficient you get, the more carbon smart you get, the more you generate better job growth, more economic opportunities, and in fact, you become an export leader. And when we look at what's happened in Denmark, and in Germany, and in California, and now in Texas, a place some of us don't think about as a clean energy leader, but now likely to be the global leader in wind, we're seeing the story again and again. The transition, of course, is tricky. You've got to figure out the right range of policies, find ways to get companies in the public sector to evolve. But that message that there is more economic opportunity in doing the green growth path is what we are seeing now. Again, Brazil just wrote out a big national commission report. Another one from Mexico, Nigeria, all finding ways to generate faster job growth in this area. California is emerging from a very serious recession. The only sector of the industrial base that grew significantly during that time, the last 5 years, was the clean tech, the clean energy sector, that grew almost 9% a year, whereas the overall economy in California decreased by about 1.5%. Same thing in a village where I'm working in Nicaragua, where clean energy, a partnership of the community, local lighting, an indigenous community, a First Peoples effort, to go find the one local industry, an ice-making plant, so they could export lobster. They found a way to partner and use excess energy, use smart meters in a little village. It's called Marshall Point, for those of you who want to look on a map. It's near Bluefields on the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua. These are opportunities up and down the spectrum. And when I look at Australia, and many of the calls I get from companies, it's remarkable how having an incredible renewable energy resource, from solar and wind to ocean energy, biofuels, allows economies like this to be an export leader into this new global economy. A third of all investment in energy last year globally was in the renewable space. A third of all the investment. And we're just beginning to ramp up these kinds of policies. So it's the opportunity, the green job creation part of the story that we see as the real driver for economic change. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation. Love to go into more of the details in the particular cases, but it really is a remarkable evolution. And I'm just really honored to be here in a place that's really taking it on and looking to putting it into place. So thanks so much for the chance to talk today.
Okay, yes, there? Yes. Okay, I'm also very happy to come back to Sydney. I've been here several times, but every time I get the feeling what the people live here and what kind of city actually in the world is the best place to live. So China is developing very quickly. We are constructing our city. So this is a learning process for me to be here. Okay, let me come back for climate change issues. I think maybe many of you heard about that. Maybe in the negotiation process, China always say we are a developing country. We cannot sit together with many developed countries for some target setting. But this is a negotiation process in the domestic things. I think from energy efficiency viewpoint, renewable energy viewpoint, China is moving very fast. This is only for domestic, which is a sustainable development purpose. For example, we just started our 12th five-year plan. Actually, 12th five-year plan is from 2011 to 2015. Normally, China has 5-year plan. It's the first time China put our carbon emission target into the 5-year plan. This means every 5-year plan, if you put something in that, we say it's legally binding. We have to reach the target, and we do our effort. So this means we'll have a lot of policy coming out in the near future. But let me go back to see what happened for 11th five-year plan, because I just published a paper in year 2010 to give a summarize what happened for energy efficiency and renewable energy there. 11th five-year plan is the first time China put energy efficiency target into the 5-year plan. There's a 20% energy intensity reduction target for 5 years. But this target is very tough, even though originally our studies show we are now doing 20, we are a bit lower, but the government want to push it higher. So in order to be a target, by reviewing what happened in the 11th five-year plan, I think many of people know that in between year 2006 to year 2008, every week, China contract 2 coal-fired power plants. Every year we contract almost a double capacity than total installed capacity in Australia for power generation. So this is moving very fast. But very few people know that during the year 2006 to year 2008, almost every week, China announced one national policy on energy efficiency. They move very fast. So based on our review, we can see that by end of year 2010, almost the energy policy around the world, China pick up and learned. We take that back home. So that's our homework. We did, actually we are doing the policy assessment for Chinese government. So we review what happened in the United States, EU, Japan, Australia. Then we compare what happened in China. If there's a good thing there, we just take that back home. So the conclusion is that during the 11th five-year plan, if we measure the energy efficiency based on the physical units, that means how much energy use per ton steel, how much energy use per ton aluminum, cement we manufactured, we can see very strong decrease or energy efficiency improvement for that during the last 5 years. And China also put a very big effort. We close we say it's a small industry, something like a small coal-fired power plant. During the last 5 years, China closed almost 60 gigawatt, which I think is nearly the installed capacity in Australia. But even though the small coal-fired power plant not yet reached their lifespan, so we closed that in advance of the time it should be closed. So this is what happened actually for energy efficiency. In my paper I said is actually we never have that happen in the Chinese history, and also it's very possible in the human history never happened such kind of thing. Another data showed renewable energy. Actually, several days ago, when we have a meeting in Victoria University in Melbourne, one picture showed there's in total investment for renewable energy in year 2010, China almost accounted 50% of the global investment. By thinking about the lower cost for renewable energy, for example, for wind turbine, for solar, actually in China, at least something like 30% lower cost than other countries. So we believe in near future in China, the renewable energy will be installed capacity will be account more than 50% of global installed. This actually happened for there. But so far, China doing this money for domestic thing because we cannot make our environment worse. So the government set a very strong target for the environment quality improvement. So they cannot use more coal-fired power plant. They shifted to natural gas, shifted to renewable energy. So this is a fundamental target. But what do we think? I think in the 12th five-year plan, what happens now, just right now, we are eagerly want to learn what happened in other countries for climate change. Just like what I mentioned about maybe for energy efficiency, for other things, we don't have much space for new policy, but we will take a tougher policy for existing policy in the coming five-year plan. And we're also learning some new thing for China. For example, we don't have a carbon tax. We don't have emission trading. That's the reason why now we carefully look at what happened in Australia. You are trying to use this carbon pricing. My team and my colleague in other research institutes, we are studying what happened in Australia. And if you did a good job, certainly we will bring this back to China. And we also did a lot of study for US and the EU for the emission trading. I think this is something new for China to specify on climate change we will do. And I believe very soon, actually, nowadays, even though it's very difficult for China to take any cap on CO2 emission, but very soon, I think our energy planning will announce this discussion, still under discussion, we will have a cap on total energy demand. We have another target for non-fossil fuel target by 2020, together with the total energy demand. Something like we already have something like cap on CO2 emission. So this is in the progress. I believe the domestic progress is much faster than the international negotiation process. This actually, I want to see what happened here in China, and I believe we will do our biggest effort to join the big family globally to do CO2 mitigation. And hopefully China, maybe in 1 decade or 2 decades, we can peak our CO2 emission and start to decrease. This is our fundamental idea from research report. Anyway, my homework is to do the research for policy and try to convince the government to use that. So I'm happy to be here and learning maybe this week what's the process that happened in Australia for the carbon pricing. Thank you very much.
Lord Mayor and friends, India is a relatively poor country. Some 70 to 80% of the people live with less than $2 a day. We have a large deficit in human development, and if we want to meet that, if we want to provide a reasonable level of human development to our people, our economy needs to grow at maybe 8 to 10% per year for the next 20, 30 years. And that would really require that we increase our energy consumption and so on. And that's why many people are concerned that if India's energy consumptions are growing, why should we take any action on our side? Now, I want to address that question, why should others do something? India has not been responsible for climate change in any sense of the term. Our current emission per person is around 1.3 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year, which is, I think, 1/10 or 1/15 that of an average Australian and an average American. So, and even if you consider that whatever carbon dioxide that is emitted by mankind, part of it gets absorbed by natural systems. Say 15 billion tons of CO2 gets absorbed by the global commons, by seas and other things. And if you give a reasonable allocation to India of that absorption capacity, then India's emissions have never exceeded that absorptive capacity. So in the global buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you might say that not 1 ton of CO2 is something that has been added by India. And yet, I think we believe that we are a responsible nation, that we are highly vulnerable to any impact of climate change. And because we will be very vulnerable, we have an interest in seeing a global action taken to minimize the risk of climate change. And that is what I think the reason why India has indeed taken some unilateral action to reduce its carbon emissions, so that it would really maybe encourage, stimulate, shame others into taking action. How vulnerable India is? Well, there are many ways India is vulnerable to climate change. Say, for example, a sea level rise of 1 meter would displace some tens of millions of people in India. But what is even more frightening for us is that 1/3 of Bangladesh would be underwater, and that would displace maybe 35 million people from Bangladesh. Many of them would spill over into India. So that is one problem. The other thing is that the expectation or fear is that the Himalayan glaciers would melt. That would completely change the hydrological pattern of river flows. More floods will take place, summers would be drier, and of course the whole cropping pattern and other things would have to adapt to it, and a large number of people would depend on agriculture, their livelihoods would be threatened. So these are some of the issues that we consider are serious, and we need to take or encourage a global action on these things. The Prime Minister of India really promised at the Gleneagle Summit in 2005, and he said that we are determined to see that our per capita emissions do not exceed the per capita emissions of industrialized countries at any time in the future. So if you reduce your emissions to 3 tons per capita, we will never exceed 3 tons per capita. So that's the promise India has made, and I think we can live up to it, provided there is some action that takes place. And the stronger action, the quicker action is taken by developed countries, by industrialized countries, the stronger action India would take. The PM set up a council for climate change, and that council has set up defined a national action plan to mitigate for climate change. And that action plan talks of 8 national missions which will address different aspects of the climate change problem that India faces. Nearly half of them really concentrate largely on mitigation, and other half concentrate mainly on adaptation. And these include a mission, a solar mission. And the objective of the solar mission is to bring solar power, make it cost competitive to coal-based power by 2020. And in order to do that, we have also said that the government will encourage, through subsidies and other measures, establishment of 20,000 megawatt worth of solar power capacity by 2012. So this is the solar mission. Then we have a mission on energy efficiency, which addresses issues in energy efficiencies in lighting, in buildings, in appliances, in transport, and all sectors of the economy. Another mission promotes renewables of various kinds. Another one is a Green India mission, where the objective is to put 10 million hectares of additional land under green cover. India already has some 22% of its land under forest, and the area under forest have actually been increasing in the last 10 years, and we want to put another 10 million hectares of land under green cover. We have also introduced a coal tax or coal cess, and that is about $2 a ton, which would roughly come to about $1 per person on a national level, and that is to be compared with the $600 per person annual income. So you compare that $1 to $600, and maybe appropriate tax can be devised for Australia. I think that tax is to be then used to support and promote renewable energy in India. Part of it I already talked about, solar mission. And we have also set up an expert group on low carbon strategy, which I chair, which is set up by the Planning Commission. And the target is, as the Indian government had announced at the Copenhagen summit, that we would reduce our energy or emission intensity by 25% by 2020. And our group has been asked to see what can be done and how it can be done. We have already submitted our interim report, and that report says that we could indeed easily, not easily, but with some determined effort, bring down our emission intensity by 25% by 2020, even if the economy grows at 8% or 9% per year during this period. And if we really make a more, what we call, aggressive effort, where we have financial and technological support available from international sources, then we can even reduce our emission intensity by 35% by 2020. So it is indeed something that can be achieved, and without really enormous cost to the economy. In fact, I was a member of the Planning Commission, and at that time I was looking after energy, and formulated the Integrated Energy Policy Committee, energy policy of the Government of India. And that policy, and looking at in an integrated way to the policies, energy sector, shows clearly that India, even if there is no threat of climate change, has a lot of compulsion to develop its own renewable energy sources from the point of view of energy security. India currently imports 80% of its oil and gas, and that its coal is its main resource, and yet the coal that India has, the currently known extractable coal reserves, will be exhausted within the next 40-45 years if we keep growing, if the growth of coal use keeps growing at 5% per year. So we really need to develop some renewable sources, and solar is our most important major energy source. So it is, the point I want to make is that it is actually in India's interest to develop renewable sources for not only the concern for climate change, which is a serious concern for us, but also for our energy security. That is also another serious concern for us. So I think we do believe we have other missions like Sustainable Habitat, National Water Mission, Himalayan Ecosystem, and also Science and Technology for Climate Change. And with all these, a comprehensive effort is being mounted to deal with the issue of climate change. And I hope this would also stimulate others to take action, and we can have a global compact that can really ensure a safe world for mankind. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Minik Rosing, and I am a geologist, and I'm also from Greenland, a place where climate change is not only a scientific issue, but it's actually a practical thing you experience every day. And I'm also living in Denmark, and I think to keep my presentation short and not tell you a lot of things you might not want to hear, but rather let you ask questions about things you do want to hear, I'll focus on the Danish aspect, because the theme here is the international correlation between Australia and the rest of the world. And Denmark is a country where we have 30 years of experience already in the transfer from carbon-based to renewable energy. And it was not inspired by climate at that time. It was after the first oil crisis that Denmark realized that we were strongly dependent on imported oil and coal, and that this was actually not a very secure situation. Also, it was extremely expensive for the Danish economy. So we started a two-lane road from there. One that was focused on energy efficiency, basically trying to make the housing and all parts of our energy consumption much more efficient. And the other was to start to develop renewable energy sources, mainly wind energy. And the outcome of that, if you look back over the past 30 years, is that the Danish economy had an increase of 78% during those 30 years, and the energy consumption was kept constant during that period, and the emissions were decreasing a little bit. So our experience was that the change into a renewable energy-based energy system was neither painful nor costly to our society. It actually did not had adverse effects on our economy. And Denmark, based on this experience, and also, of course, to comply with the EU targets, have now made a plan on how to outphase carbon-based energy completely before 2020. And it's not just a vision or something; it's actually a plan that has designed means and methods to do it. That's based completely on existing technology that is economically feasible. All the models that have been run across this tells that by 2050, the money invested and the price the country pays for its energy consumption will be the same as if you just continued using carbon-based energy during that time. So it's not that there is any cost associated with it. So I think for Denmark, the experience has been that the change to renewable energy early on has actually given a lot of benefits. The Danish wind turbine industry is a major export industry in Denmark. We have the strange situation now that the various various power plants are fighting over household garbage and waste because it's a very valuable commodity. It's a good energy source, and all garbage and waste is going into energy generation in combined electricity and community heating plants. So I think just to wrap this up very, very briefly, is that Denmark has experienced that taxing energy use is a very powerful instrument to change the direction of societal evolution or development, and that it has caused absolutely no pain or no economic loss to Denmark, but rather put us in an advanced position in the present world. And that's the reason why we want to continue with that. And as I said, to begin with, it was not inspired by climate. It was just an economic and national interest consideration that brought us on that track, and it has turned out to be, I think, a very fortunate track for Denmark. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Linda Adams. I just retired from the job of Secretary of the California Environmental Protection Agency. I was very honored to serve 3 governors, Governor Gray Davis, who signed the first in the nation law to address climate change, Governor Schwarzenegger, who signed probably the most comprehensive law in the nation, and now Governor Brown, who recently signed a law calling for more renewable energy in California. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to share California's plan to transition to a clean energy economy. California's leadership, we're the 8th largest economy in the world, and I think what we've done to move to clean energy will demonstrate that environmental protection and economic growth do go hand in hand. And California is particularly impacted by climate change. We're starting to see the impacts already. We're a dry climate. We rely very heavily on what I like to call our free water supply reservoir, and that's our Sierra Nevada snowpack. We're having earlier spring runoff. We'll have additional flooding, threats to our water supply. Our fire seasons, the cost of our fire seasons has, I think, gone up tenfold in the last couple of decades. We now spend almost $500 million to fight fires in California. We've also seen a spike in heat-related deaths, and we actually declare heat emergencies now in California. We also have, of course, a world-class agricultural industry, and an interesting phenomena is the spike in nighttime temperatures, which will affect our permanent crops in California. So our economic analysis shows that the cost of inaction greatly would outweigh the cost of taking action, and that taking action will create jobs and save dollars for households. So the law recently signed, or signed in 2006, time flies when you're having fun. We are taking a very comprehensive approach to addressing climate change. It's a very ambitious but achievable goal. Our goal is to reduce to 1990 levels by the year 2020. That's 30% reduction from business as usual. We have a number of key elements. One is energy efficiency. California is already, like Professor Kammen said, the most energy efficient state in the nation. Over 3 decades, we have saved businesses and households $53 billion. We have additional energy efficiency standards coming into place that will save another $23 billion over 5 years. So that's a very key portion of our plan. We also have a goal to meet our 33% renewable energy by the year 2020. We think with all the work we're doing in the area of solar energy, we will be able to meet that goal. Transportation is our biggest source of emissions in California, almost 40%. We started tackling that problem when Governor Davis was governor. He signed first in the nation emission standards for the automobile sector, and we're very proud to say that those are now national standards. We have special authority under the Federal Clean Air Act because California had a Clean Air Act before the federal government did. If California acts, other states are able to act. We had 13 other states enact the same law. We had a 7-year battle with the auto industry. They filed suits in 22 different courts around the country. They sued us, we sued them. We sued President Bush. We started winning all those suits. We were able to convince the US Supreme Court that the auto industry could indeed meet the standards easily with off-the-shelf technology. And the way we wrote it, a declining fleet average, so you can still have your big pickup truck, or you can have your little Prius, or you can have something in between. So then, of course, the other big piece of our plan is our cap and trade program, which will be imposed upon our largest emitters. We chose as a policy not to regulate small business or to regulate California agriculture, but instead continue an incentive-based approach for them. So our strategy relies primarily on market-based mechanisms, flexible compliance rules. Let the businesses innovate and let them find the most cost-effective strategies. This was a big issue for Governor Schwarzenegger, a market-based approach. So we feel that that approach will provide incentives for further innovation in California. And how will these actions benefit households and businesses? And I already mentioned the amount we will save through energy efficiency. We expect annual savings of $400 to $500 per household. Businesses, particularly small businesses, will spend less on energy and transportation fuels. And I'll just talk a little bit about cap and trade. That program will be launched next year, bringing in first electricity generation and large industrial facilities. That will affect 350 businesses and 600 facilities in California. In 2015, we bring in transportation fuels, refineries. We do have cost containment measures, banking of allowances. We allow offsets. I know those are controversial here. They're also controversial at home. So we've spent a lot of time making sure that any offset program we develop will ensure that these reductions are real, verifiable, permanent. We have rules for verifiers, conflict of interest rules. I'm very excited about the offsets because we're able to bring in other sectors that will benefit through these offset programs. And one is, we have a protocol for forest management and reforestation. We have a protocol for capturing methane from dairy farms. We are working on an urban forestry protocol. We're working on protocols so that agriculture can benefit to employ practices such as low tillage and reduced nutrient management. We are venturing in a little bit into the international market as well. California, similar to Australia, is about 1.4% of emissions worldwide. So our law acknowledges that this is a global problem that requires a global solution and directs us to go work with other states and other countries around the world. We have a regional program in the western states and with Canadian provinces. When we launch our cap and trade next year, our first trading partners will be the provinces of Quebec and British Columbia in Canada. We have an effort with what we call the Three Regions effort that includes 18 states and provinces in the US and Canada. We've also launched what we call the International Carbon Action Partnership, and that's made up of like-minded states, provinces, and countries. And eventually, we're leading towards an international carbon market. We have to start with something very basic in this ICAP effort, and that is looking at how to standardize monitoring, reporting, and verification so that we're all talking the same language before we can actually do an international market. Also, Governor Schwarzenegger has formed an organization similar to the C40 organization that Sydney is a leader in, and we borrowed from the G20. We are the R20 Regions of Climate Action. We have 26 states and provinces around the world, and they're from everywhere. We have African states, we have states in Europe, and we are having our first General Assembly in New York in a couple of weeks. So what does this all mean for California's economy? You heard from Dan Kammen that our clean tech jobs are far outpacing other sectors of our economy. That's the one bright spot in our economy. Venture capital literally is pouring into the state, and the investors say that's due to California's policies. In fact, a few years ago, we had the entire Renewable Energy Association of the United States from all over came to Sacramento and said, please enact a higher renewable energy standard. We need the market signal. We want to invest in California, but we need the assurance, the market signal. And in fact, we did increase that standard. So California is becoming a global leader in innovation, and you know, we had the high-tech boom, and now we're going to have the green tech boom. And so I think my bottom line here, my message is that the argument of it's the environment or the economy is really a false choice, because we are demonstrating that the two can work together. So again, thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Now, Tim has asked me to do a little summary. I'm going to keep it very quick because I think we really ought to get into a conversation. I guess what I've got from today, but also from talking with these guys over the last week, is that all the major emitters are acting. All of them have made a critical judgment that we're going to build a global agreement through action, from acting ourselves and working together. And when we've got confidence in what we're doing, then we'll be able to build a global agreement that's binding. We can't do it the other way around. And I was one of the architects of Kyoto, so I've had 10 years of trying to negotiate global agreements. Secondly, all the big players have got a comprehensive approach. A carbon price is a part, but it's only a part. There are lots of other actions. Dan and I, on the bus, working on the back of the envelope, classic way for economists to work, figured out that it must be something well over 1 billion people globally who face a shadow carbon price already. And if you look at the explicit trading systems, Europe, what's happening in California, in Canada, and in the northeast states. The trial that Zhang spoke of in China, which will cover 6 cities and 4 provinces, that sounds small, but it's 238 million people, and if it were an independent country, it would be in the G20. 238 million people, and that starts in 2015. So there are already big numbers out there that are acting, and there are huge numbers that are being invested in green technology and in green science, if you like, in sensible and smart regulation, in integrative services, and this is happening around the world, but in China in particular, almost 50% of renewable investment will be accounted for by investment within China by the end of the decade. And we're talking billions of dollars. Now, it seems to me that this is a massive opportunity for Australia to broaden our relationships with the region, to be not just a resource exporter, but also a services and technology exporter. This is a way of hedging the resource card, if you like. Not betting the whole lot on that card, but actually building a deeper and more resilient relationship that will carry on in the longer term. But that will only happen if we have a domestic environment that's conducive to our best and our brightest people putting effort in that direction. And that really requires sustained policies, regulatory, and a sustained carbon price back here at home, because that's the way we'll be able to build the capacity to take advantage of that opportunity that is absolutely available. Thank you. We'll be coming to questions.
If you've got to direct your attention my way, and if you have a question, put your hand up. So if we can start with this gentleman in the room over here.
Jonathan Doig. Why on earth would Australia shift from coal to fossil methane gas when we now see the science saying that gas is every bit as bad as coal from a greenhouse perspective over the next 90 years and even worse over the next few decades, and particularly when Melbourne University has shown with the Zero Carbon Australia report that we can use baseload solar, as they already have in Spain, running 24/7.
Just briefly, if you would.
And shift direct to 100% renewable energy in 10 years.
So
and we'll be making money
right.
within 30
That's
years out
question.
of that.
So we'll begin with that, Roger.
Okay,
Thanks,
look, I understand what you're saying. I've seen the Melbourne report. Most economists, and I'm an economist for all my sins, actually see gas as one of the important bridging technologies on our way through to very much lower emissions by the mid-century. And it's an easy stepping path. And Dr. Chang, for example, referred to the growth in the use of gas in China as being one of their key initiatives. But Dan, I wonder, you've got global experience in this?
Well, I think that from my perspective, looking at the range of technologies, there's a common refrain in this field, and that is that there really isn't a silver bullet, but there's silver buckshot. And there's lots of technologies that fit different niches, different local economic conditions, local opportunities, and finding that balance is right. For example, in California and in Northern Europe, they're working on plans for 100% decarbonized economies over a number of decades. Zero carbon by 2050 is actually the refrain in a number of places. Other places that have a different mix, both in terms of resources and in terms of capital available to make the transition, see different strategies. And so the essence of what you're saying, in my opinion, is that the life cycle impact of different technologies matters. There may be cleaner or dirtier ways to use a variety of them, and it's not just carbon. It's also water, land use. I work with a number of First Peoples in North America that are very concerned about pollution on their land from fossil fuels and see renewable energy as an opportunity for them to be clean energy exporters. It's that mix. Each individual municipality looks at that opportunities and really picks and chooses from that menu, and I think that's the approach. And so while the Melbourne study is a very impressive one, there's also an excellent study from the Technical University of Denmark. There's one that's been done in California at Caltech there's a number of them that look at the really aggressive clean energy strategies, and many islands see that as the way to go because of expensive fossil fuels. I think the mix, though, is really the piece I would keep in mind, that local impacts, local benefits will drive those strategies. But you're right that there are some very aggressive clean energy paths that are being highlighted and we're finding are more and more doable as we learn more about the field.
If I can have a show of hands of people in the room. There's a woman in the middle of the room here. If I could direct the microphone to her next. There it comes on your right.
Thank you. My name is Ariana Plaisier. Basically, my question regards science. And because we've heard now from you science that supports the idea of man-made climate change, I was just wondering how you are all dealing with all the science that's out there that's telling another story, basically. It's just trying to figure it out for myself.
Who would like to take that, Tim?
I might just take that. Look, when you look at the public debate around climate change, particularly in terms of climate science, you could be forgiven for thinking there was a real debate out there, because the media tends to give equal time to both people who have their own particular view of it and the mainstream scientific view. Here in Australia, the Climate Commission put together a report on the basic science, which we presented to Federal Parliament in May this year. The report that we put forward was accepted by both sides of Australian politics, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. It's based on the Australian Academy of Sciences and the IPCC work. In almost any scientific area you'll find debate and dissent, as it should be. There's people with a variety of views. But 97% or thereabouts of climate scientists around the world accept that basic science, and that's what policy should be based on rather than on an idiosyncratic view.
Linda, we're going to hear from you on that one. You want Professor Rosing, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, but I think the evidence is overwhelming. And for the United States, this is, I think we need to move away from the science debate. For the U.S., it's a national security issue for us. I recently heard a U.S. oil man, T. Boone Pickens, at a speech saying how much money the U.S. sends to hostile governments. It's $400 billion a year to governments that want to destroy us. That's not good policy. And so we need to reduce our dependence on foreign oil.
How does somebody like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you don't imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger being a campaigner, as he is, for action on climate change. So how does he talk about that out of the scientific sphere, in the political sphere? That's a good question,
because he actually, at his second inauguration speech, gave a very eloquent analogy, and it was, if you take your child is not feeling well, you take the child to 100 doctors, and 99 doctors say, your child needs some medicine, and one says no, what would you do? You would give your child some medicine. So, but I think we can debate the science until all the glaciers are gone. And, but for the United States, it's a different debate, and that also goes to the gentleman's question about natural gas. Yeah. That is. Might be a transition for the U.S. because we have natural gas reserves, we have access to natural gas in our friendly neighbor, Mexico. So there are many, many reasons to be doing what we're doing, and I'm not sure that debating the science is that fruitful.
Professor Rosing?
Yeah, I just think that it has often been portrayed as if climate science is something that has just emerged and it's kind of a fad that the scientific community has nurtured because it gives you money or whatever. But the understanding of how Earth's climate functions is more than 150 years old. It has completely been established for more than 100 years that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and that is what is responsible for keeping the Earth at the temperature it is today. That is basic physics, and it's completely uncontested. What is the problem today is, of course, that there's a lot of detail that you cannot explain easily in terms of climate science. But if you have the geologic record, which I work on, I'm not a climate scientist, I'm a geologist. And what you can see is that living organisms throughout Earth's history have been interfering with Earth's atmosphere and has been controlling, basically, through that, the Earth's atmosphere. And this has gone well for a long period of time, but at times also gone seriously wrong. And I think that what distinguishes man from every other organism that have been able to influence the Earth system through time is that we actually have an intellect to analyze what we're doing and make a turn before it goes wrong. And I would advise you all to take a stroll down along the waterfront of Sydney here to the rocks, which are a beautiful place, and all the rock outcrops here. What you see there is desert sands. And those desert sands were deposited after a major greenhouse crisis that happened 250 million years ago, when big coal fields took fire in Russia and rose the CO2 level in the atmosphere and wiped out 96% of the living species in the ocean. You had a global desert at that time. Australia was at the South Pole at that time. You still had almost desert climate here in Australia during that period of time. So I think that it's not a theory, it's not something that we are speculating, it's something that's observable both through experience, 4 billion years of experience, and it's also based on complete normal scientific principles that we use in our everyday life. When you turn on the light switch, it doesn't come as a surprise to you that the light bulb goes on. You know exactly what's happening. It's exactly the same principles that are behind what our understanding of the climate.
All right, if I can come to this lady here, and then I'll make my way from here across the room that way. So we'll start with this lady here.
I'd like to thank you all very much. You've added to my understanding, and I found what you had to say very interesting. But I have a question about measures. We've heard a lot of talk about per capita consumption. Should that not go hand in hand with the population increase? Otherwise, we'll reduce our per capita consumption, but our increase in emissions will just continue to rise.
That's a great policy question. Who'd like to take that one?
I really think that, yes, population should be controlled, and you know, China has taken very stringent measure of having one-child family. India has been promoting family planning for a number of years to having no more than 2 children. And currently, I think 3 or 4 states in India has already reached a level of fertility which is below the replacement level. And we are expecting that the other, you know, some of the other states and the country as a whole would reach that level not too far in the distant future. But I mean, it would have been great if we had able to control our population, but it has not been possible despite the measures, because we have not wanted to use coercion in any sense of the term.
I think we also try to find some solution. For example, China will have a big population, but whether China also can do low carbon emission in future, even though the population is still quite high. So we have 2 ways. One is the technology can solve the problem. We have a lot of renewable energy. China still hold on nuclear. And together with, we change our consumption, our behavior. For example, actually, I learned a lot from Sydney and Melbourne that people use more bicycle rather than car. So this actually China is doing another round. We are using more car rather than bicycle. If you went to China several years or 10 years ago, how many bicycles there? But nowadays, doing more and more car have much more serious traffic jam in Beijing than here. But we are coming back. We try to convince the local government they should learn from something like Sydney, Melbourne, and Stockholm to have more bicycle lane and encourage people to use that. So these are 2 sides we can do together.
All right, we'll come to this lady in the back over here in the purple.
Hi, thank you. You know, there's a lot of exciting innovations in the whole of the renewal area. I think one area that isn't particularly exciting is the language in which you're selling the message. A woman raised this on Q&A a couple of weeks ago, and I was reminded of living in Canberra in the 80s, going walking with my children, and someone was watering the driveway, and my son called out, "Hey, won't grow, mate." And it struck me then that, you know, primary teachers are in the business of breaking down complex messages into simple messages that children can understand.
So the question, if I can be so
yes.
presumptuous.
Right. The question is, are you considering looking at other ways in which you can get this message across? More simple language, and also perhaps appealing to the way we did things in the past, the kind of Australian character of saving everything, even milk bottle tops, you know, to appeal to that national fervour?
It's a lovely question. I think we have it. Tim, you're a great communicator.
Sure. Well, look, we're always seeking new ways to get the message through. Our role is to communicate and create a dialogue with the Australian public. We're trying to make our reports very plain language and easily understood and easily accessible. But there's always a challenge in doing that, and we hope we'll rise to it.
It's Warren Yates. Look, I'm very pleased to hear what you've had to say about global action. A lot of us in Australia have been frustrated, extremely frustrated by the lack of government action and are attempting to take action on our own behalf. We've done things like assess our own carbon footprints, and when I did that for my own household, I was surprised to learn that just the amount of money I spent on stuff was contributing greatly to my carbon footprint. In fact, it was the biggest contributor of all. And so I'm just a little bit puzzled by the notion that it really is possible to solve the problem and yet maintain economic growth.
Yeah. Dan Cameron, yeah.
So I think this is a really eloquent question because it pulls together so many aspects of our system. There's no simple answer to it, so the question will be better than the answer. But what we've seen is some communities are making carbon footprint calculators available like you've described. Others are trying to find ways to envision what a lack or using less resources but getting more services out of the equation will do for you. The California story that Linda and I mentioned is really one of electricity use per person and energy use per person in the US rising steadily. But California, through not one policy, but a series of battles against inefficient lighting and refrigerators and too much driving, one of our addiction problems in California. Those things overall meant that not only California, but other states as well, New York, Rhode Island, Wisconsin, in warm and cool climates, were able to separate out, and they were able to keep energy use per person more or less level for the past 3 to 4 decades, whereas the rest of the country has risen steadily. All of these are aspects of what you're describing. There's a new movement in parts of the US, not so new in Argentina, not so new here, in looking at the footprint, not just of carbon, but of water and land, of the foods we eat. The slow food movement, the local food movement. These are all ways to do what I think is really the most important story, and that is to get more services and better quality of life out of using less resources. And that's a very local decision. What you get in city councils here and there is critically impacts how your quality of life will go. But it's that diversity of experiences that what we're really collecting together in overuse of energy and overemission of carbon is a form of waste. And what we're now developing is the language, the currency, if you will, to find ways to waste less and profit more. And that's a difficult transition, and that's what the dialogue is about.
Roger?
No, very simple. I thought it was a beautiful question. And I think it partly gets to the fact that we've got to dematerialise, we've got to decouple material, physical consumption from our concepts of welfare, because I believe that you can strongly grow human welfare in that sense.
The people at DJs are just hanging their head at this stage, aren't they? They can't get us to spend any money, and now Roger Beale's on like this.
You can grow welfare and at the same time significantly reduce the amount of bloody stuff that you've got and the amount of emissions that you're implicitly consuming.
My name is Alan Sangster. In Australia, we have a problem that government-funded climate scientists refuse to explain their position on carbon dioxide to professional engineers. And of course, professional engineers are the ones that have to implement all this stuff. Do you have similar problems in your various countries?
All right. Who would like to take that question? Do we understand the question?
No. Yeah, no, I don't think we have that kind of a problem. I think by and large, people do accept that the science is clear. If you put carbon dioxide in the air, that does indeed increase increase temperature. Now, one can ask the question that is this man-made carbon dioxide that is causing the problem, or natural system-made carbon dioxide that's the problem? That's even if people have some doubts about what the origin of that carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is, it is quite clear that we should not contribute by human action to increasing the concentration of GHGs in the atmosphere. And in any case, whatever the reason is, precautionary principle requires that we take action now to reduce whatever we are doing so that we don't aggravate the situation, even if it is caused by natural factors other than human activities.
Jim?
Look, the situation for science is pretty clear. The Australian Academy of Sciences has put out a very clear message on climate change. I believe that the institution that represents all of the engineers in Australia has put out a similar statement to that. Wherever I travel around the world, I see engineers doing great things in terms of helping to reduce emissions and increase efficiency. I do a little bit of work with Siemens on their Sustainability Advisory Board, one of the great engineering companies on earth, and they're doing extraordinary things in terms of addressing this issue. So I don't see the divide that you mentioned.
There's a question here in the front.
Charles Rue, my name. It seems there's been some indication, but if we can't take the people with us on this programs of changing the way we live, it's not going to work. And in Australia at the moment, I think we're stuck in the sense that we're not taking the people with us in general. You know, so is there a psychology sort of contribution that needs to be made, you know, to getting people's psyche changed over to a new dream, you know, a new way of living, a new Aussie dream?
Yeah, right. That's a great question, Chip.
Can I just very briefly address that? Because we spend, you know, every couple of weeks we're out there among the Australian public talking about climate change and its implications for this country. And the view we get is not quite as bleak as you've put there. We still find a majority of people understand that humans are affecting the climate and that something needs to be done about it. There's great divergence of opinion as to exactly what needs to be done about it. But we do find, particularly in regional Australia, a great appetite for the opportunities this will open up in terms of renewable energy generation and also sequestration of carbon on farm. So that is an important aspect of community acceptance of this sort of thing. We also find that there's a relationship between the level of ignorance of what's proposed for various people and their fear. So those who work in businesses, perhaps smaller businesses that haven't had a chance to model the impacts of any particular proposal, tend to be rather fearful of the outcome. Those who come from businesses that have done that due diligence, even if they're producing quite a lot of carbon, are much more relaxed about it, and some of them even see opportunities in that. So it is an educational issue, but I don't think it's quite as bleak as you put it as far as the Australian public as a whole is concerned.
All right, and my patient friend over here, yes.
There's been or just about monthly now, we get reports where eminent scientists who've been pushing the global warming story 10 years later have been proven to be totally and utterly wrong. For example, David Viner from...
Yeah.
Well,
if you would, only because
quick, but I have to have a little.
Because I would like to hear about 3 or 4 questions back to back in the 5 minutes available. So that's the only reason I'm hurrying.
If I can finish, but
yes,
there's all these examples where a huge fear has gone out, and it's turned out to be totally and utterly wrong.
And the question, therefore,
who is auditing the bullshit?
All right, thank you. Who is auditing the bullshit? A quick question for this gentleman here who's been waiting a long time.
Harry Stevens from Paracan Climate Action Group. In view of the fact that, Professor Flannery, I think, in view of the fact that climate change does not know any geographical or political or national boundaries, therefore it's an international question. This is more of a national issue, so that the question is, does Professor Flannery see the possibility of our present multi-party climate committee become the basis for a full cabinet on climate change, which I think is necessary because it's an emergency?
All right, you hang on to that, Tim. One question from this gentleman back here and one from there, and then we'll see if we can answer them all simultaneously.
Murray Matson, Mayor, Randwick City Council. This year the state government has announced that it's going to review the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, which we use as councillors to plan densities and whatever. What single legislative initiative could the state of New South Wales bring in to become another California?
That's a wonderful question. And there's a gentleman standing over here very patiently. He'll have to be our last question today. If I could ask Angela, can you just run to that gentleman over there with the tie? And he can be our last question. So I think I have all of them written down.
Thank you. My name's David James, Pittwater councillor. The IPCC Fourth Amendment had some difficulty with dealing with the subject of the contribution to sea level rise that was being caused by melting of ice sheets, as we know, in the North Pole.
This caught your attention at Pittwater,
land-based ice. Now, the current measurement for global sea level rise, average, is 3.1 centimetres. Should the predictions of the A1FI curve and the latest opinions that the scientific contribution could be as high as 46 centimetres, that's the International Snow and Ice Data Centre, what will that hold, that measure will that hold for us in terms of the impact on the low-lying lands all around the world?
Great. Tim, would you like to begin that?
Look, I might just roll those questions into a wrap-up because we're really running out of time. But I just needed to take the question, who monitors the bullshit? The way that we get to a credible position in science is that someone writes a piece of research, sends it to a journal, the journal editor then sends it out for review, and the journal editor will pick the most ferocious reviewers they can because the only asset a scientific journal has is its credibility and its reputation. So they don't want to publish rubbish. When it comes to the Academy of Sciences, they represent every scientist in Australia. They're incredibly conservative. When they make a statement on the science, which incorporates all of the gathered peer-reviewed science, you can be sure that's credible. That's where you go for real informed opinion. If you just want an average opinion, go to your local taxi driver or your local radio show shock jock or something like that. But for real facts on the issue, go to someone like the Academy of Sciences. Don't believe necessarily what I say or anyone else, go to the experts. In terms of there was a question about what New South Wales could do. We sat this morning with a team from the City of Sydney Council looking at that. The thing that they said they needed was regulatory reform, a clarity in terms of responsibility of various levels of government, from the federal through to the state to the council level, to allow the implementation of these green policies to occur. Now, there's a whole basket of changes, regulatory changes that have to occur there, but a reorganisation of responsibilities, I think, was really, really clear. Now, the other questions were...
the IPCC and
Oh yeah, the IPCC. I chaired the Australian Coastal Committee for a number of years, and we saw there that the Australian federal government has used a rather precautionary approach in terms of sea level rise. They're projecting or planning for a rise of about 1.1 metres of sea level by 2100. And that's a good precautionary approach to the thing, because the IPCC says that just thermal expansion of the oceans will give us about half of that, and then you've got to anticipate a certain amount of ice melt on top, and that's very difficult to do, to work out how much. The experts that I talk to in terms of sea level rise are confident that that's a sensible approach that will play out over a number of decades, of course. We're not expecting the sea level to rise instantly overnight or even in a year or a decade, but there'll be a slow rise over that time, and planning for that scale's about right. Yeah. Oh, the impact on communities. Well, at 1.1 metres of sea level rise in 90 years' time, I think we've got about 250,000 houses around Australia that are vulnerable then to flooding. Quite a lot of infrastructure, including airports, railways, schools, hospitals and so forth, which are vulnerable. And the job for the three tiers of government in Australia, I think now, is to work together to minimise that exposure, to make sure that as we move forward, we're not adding to our risk in terms of projected sea level rise and its impacts. So there was... Oh, the Climate Cabinet. The multi-party committee has ceased its operations now. They wound up on Friday, on the Sunday that the legislative package was announced some months ago now. So I think that if you're looking for a more, something like a war footing for a cabinet, we'll have to look elsewhere for that. But if that's, I think, all the questions. Look, could I just thank you all for being here? I think this has been, for me, a really, really useful session. I hope it has for you too. We've heard, in brief, if I could just summarise it, there's 90 nations around the world now with carbon plans. We've heard that both India and China are taking action in this area for their own particular reasons. They may have their own orientation. I don't think there's any global conspiracy going on here. This is just people acting out of self-interest and hopefully coming together globally to do something decent. Could I just ask you to thank our international guests for coming all this way? Thank you.